começamos meia hora, nós vai ser um pouquinho mais longo hoje, tá? Por causa do atraso, devido ao equipamento aqui também, que não estava funcionando direito, tá bom? Então, estamos aí prontos para começar. Mário.
Bom dia para todos. Eu até estava falando para eles uma brincadeira, que ainda bem que a gente está perto do Instituto Butantan, porque aqui só tem cobra, né? Então tragam seu soro antiofídico. Eu vou apresentar todos eles. Primeiro nós temos o professor Tronick, né, que é de Harvard, de Boston, e ele é psicólogo e ele é diretor da Unidade de Desenvolvimento Infantil, né? Ele é especialista na relação mãe-bebê e ele vai falar com a gente já sobre essas coisas. Em seguida temos Jerome Lees, né, que também é professor de Harvard, PhD de Harvard, e é criador da psicologia corporal biossistêmica. E também temos aqui o professor Ângelo Gaiasta, que dispensa apresentações, mas que, na verdade, é um ícone para todos nós e representa já meio século de psicoterapia. E é especialista na fisiologia de respiração, de motricidade e de emoção. Então, nós vamos chamar primeiro já o professor Tronick, né, para dar a sua palestra.
Bom dia. That's all I know. It is a very strange experience to have people on the left and people on the right. So on one hand, I feel somewhat schizophrenic, that there's a polarity. And then the second reason is a cultural reason. I think it's true that I'm the only man here who's wearing a tie. But you can't laugh because it's a cultural difference. My coming from the Northeast and New England in the United States. So maybe later I will take it off. Again, I'm very happy to be here. I think the kind of work that you do and the kind of thinking that you do about the body and the body in psychotherapy is really critical to our understanding. And yet, we're only beginning to understand how to incorporate thinking about the body and thinking about other psychological functioning. And I hope in my talk today that you'll be able to take something away from the talk that helps us all to better understand what it is that we're trying to do in terms of helping people to feel better about themselves and to overcome some of their problems. And one of the terms that I use that you see up here is consciousness. I want it to be clear, even before I begin my talk, that I don't mean the consciousness of awareness necessarily, of only knowing something, but it's the consciousness It's another way to think about it is the way that individuals in their body and mind are in the world. It is how we know about our place in the world. In my view, humans are meaning makers, that we're always trying to figure out what it is about our place in the world, and that we're trying to make a coherent sense of ourselves in the world. And that sense has to do with our awareness of the world, and it also has to do with how our body is in the world. So right now, when I was talking to you and saying that it is really hard to have you on both sides of the room, part of the coherence that I'm trying to create is difficult to create because my body always has to be moving and changing and being pulled in this direction and being pulled in that direction, as much as my awareness of people on one side and on the other. But what I'm trying to do, and maybe I'll just split in half, is to get a sense of how to be able to talk with you and to bring my talk and our being together at the same time. States of consciousness have to do with age, possible meanings that individuals can make about their place in the world. Age possible because I work with babies, and I work with young children, and many of you work with babies and children and adults. But infants and children and adults make meaning about the world in very different ways. And one of the ways that babies make meaning has to do with the way their bodies are in the world. And there are several kinds of forms of meanings that fill our states of consciousness. One of them has to do with our procedural ways of being, the way we move and go through the world. My friend and colleague, George Downing, talks about body micro-practices, the small movements in our bodies that allow us to organize what's going on. And again, now I'm having a problem with my body micro-practices because of having to turn and go back and forth, or to look at them, and that's not as much fun. There are also implicit ways of knowing the world, and this is what the cognitive neuroscientists talk about. I have a request. If this light could be dimmed, it would be wonderful. This one. So these are implicit ways of knowing about the world. And then there's what Freud talked about in terms of the dynamic unconscious and the dynamic awareness. Things that are completely out of our consciousness, but they're out of consciousness because of psychodynamic reasons. Thank you. That's much better. And then lastly, there are explicit ways of knowing about the world, the kind of conscious experience we have of the world that's expressed in language and symbols. Age possible meanings. Infants make meanings out of emotional displays and express those meanings. They express their meanings with emotional displays and behavior. So I want to show you how sensitive infants are in terms of their making of meaning about the world. And this is a little baby who's only 9 weeks old. And what I do with this infant is I move in close to this infant, and then I move further away from this infant. And in doing that, I want you to watch how the baby's expressions, body, and posture change simply in relationship to my movements in closer or not. So it's not simply the physical contact or distance that's making a difference to the infant, but it's the psychological boundary between us that I'm moving in on and moving away from. Can we get the sound? Are you hearing this? Watch how he looks at me now, and he smiles, and then I come in close, and then I get in too close, and he pushes me away. Is there some way we can try to get the sound? What you can see, we won't wait for the sound. But as I move in closer to this baby, you can see how he turns away. And when I finally get far enough away from him, which is an appropriate psychological distance for him, he's able to make a very different meaning about the world. I don't necessarily know what that meaning is, but we see him smile, we see him look straight at me. And so he's constructing something about this being a way that he and I can be together. And then when I get in too close, it becomes a way that he and I cannot be together. When we look at toddlers, they make meaning not only with their body, but they make it with emotional displays, words, and their past experience of what they've done with the other person. And so their meaning making is more complicated than the meaning making that we see with infants. Now, what we have here is a baby who's playing with his mother, and they're playing with a bunch of toys and a little doll, and the boy starts to play with an alligator. And then I asked the mother to stop playing with the little boy. So she just freezes in place, and she doesn't interact with the infant. And during this period of time, the little boy gets upset, and he tries to get her to respond. And he does it by saying, "Oh, the alligator is gone. I'm going to hide the alligator," because he thinks the reason she's not moving is because she's frightened and she's not able to play with him because she's afraid. And then they resume their play. Now, I tell you this because, again, I'm not sure the sound is going to be working. And if it's not, I'll try to tell you what the little boy is saying. He's very cute, and I'm not.
Baby can go right here.
Oh, think she's warm?
No, he's cold. Yeah, we have to wrap her up.
He's wrapping up the baby.
Now it's okay.
Good.
And
Uh-oh. Oh. Where's the baby's mommy?
So the little boy brings the alligator, and the mother says, "Uh-oh, the alligator's going to get the baby. The alligator's going to get the baby." She's very playful with this little boy.
That baby needs a mother to help.
Help the
Help
alligator.
me! Help me! That alligator's biting me!
Oh, no alligators fighting. No alligator.
Now she stopped.
No alligator. He's in the cage. He's in the cage. He's in the cage. No alligator.
He says to the mother, no alligator. The alligator's in the cage. He's really saying, don't be afraid. Because remember, this little boy is reading something about the mind of the mother. He's looking at her, he's looking at the context, and he's thinking about what's in her state of mind. Infants at 3 or 4 months are not able to do this kind of meaning making that this little boy is able to do.
No alligator. No alligator. No alligator. No alligator. There's no more alligators. There's no more alligators. They're over here, Mom. No more alligators. He needs a pickle. He needs a pickle, Mom.
He says, this is so cute. He says, the alligator needs a pickle. Give the alligator a pickle. So not only is he telling about her state of mind, but he also thinks about the state of mind of the alligator. So this is very complicated, what he's doing in terms of making sense of the world.
He needs a pickle, Mommy. He needs a pickle. Mom, he needs a pickle. Mom, he needs a pickle. He needs a pickle. One pickle. Just one piece. Has ABC for alligator. For alligator. For alligator. Chef 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 for alligator. For alligator. What?
Notice how his play has really gotten much more simple.
Let's see if we can do that. Oh boy. Wanna have the girl throw it again?
So she's playing again.
Yeah.
Almost.
Almost. See if that person can throw better.
This one?
Yeah. Nope.
Almost. Maybe
Nope. Doing some seesaw.
I want you to see the end of this because he does something very special at the end, which is that at the end, after they reestablish this contact and their play together, he's going to go back to what happened with the alligator and review it with his mother so that the two of them can have now a shared meaning about what happened between them.
Who's doing on the seesaw?
Seesaw.
Now the alligator score, Mom. Now the
Oh,
alligator.
I'm glad. Because he was hurting the baby.
No, he needs a check.
Oh, who does?
The alligator.
Oh, okay. You think that'll make him feel better? Look, he can eat the whole thing. You think he can eat the hot dog?
Wah. Maybe another thing.
Hmm.
Yeah. Down. Hot dogs.
What he says is, the mother says, can he eat the hot dog? And the little boy laughs and says, no, he can't do that. And so for those of you who are into more psychodynamic interpretations of some of the things that are happening here, one can think about what it means about the little boy being frightened in this situation, about the alligator eating the baby, about the mother being frightened. So there's a very complicated set of events that this little boy has to try to make sense out of. And one of the ways he tries to make sense out of it is by himself when the mother is not responding, and then with the mother when they're now playing together again. But in both cases, in either case, he's trying to make sense about what it is that's going on in the world. So coherent states of consciousness are created by individuals using self-regulatory behaviors, what we saw this little boy doing, what we saw the baby doing when I was playing with that baby, and how the baby could turn away from me and shut me off and push me away. And they also make meaning in a dyadic way with other people, where they create new meanings together. And probably in terms of our work, what's so important about creating coherent states of consciousness is that they give us a feeling, an experience of pleasure. We literally feel a sense of expansion, the idea that we're growing and that we're becoming more able to understand the world in a coherent kind of way. And we also gain a feeling of connectedness with other people with whom we're making the meaning. If you looked at this little alligator boy, when the mother's not responding, there's a period of time where he sits back and he moves away from her and he just plays with the dollhouse. And then when they come back together again, they play together again, and the connectedness between them is reestablished. And in part, I think it's reestablished because they're able to now make meaning together. So just as a little slide or a little picture, here's a little girl who says, I feel great, I know just where I belong, and I feel connected to people and things. And you can see it simply on her face and the way her hands are being held ready to operate in the world. And then the failure to create states of consciousness. What happened to this little boy are feelings of anxiety and annihilation, shrinking, and disconnection from other people. So you look at this little girl who's a little more than 2.5 years of age, the same age as the alligator boy, and she's saying, I'm confused because I don't know my place in the world and I don't feel connected to people or things. Now we see babies this age all the time looking this distressed. And often it happens when we don't really quite understand why it's happening. But I think that the experience that a 2-year-old has or a 3-year-old has when they are crying in an inconsolable way is an extremely powerful feeling. It really is filled with anxiety and fear about what's going on because the world does not make sense to them. So I'd like to contrast successful meaning making and failure to make meanings. First, let me talk about the normal interaction between mothers and infants, or adults and infants. And the model that I talk about is a model of what I've already mentioned: self-regulation, the ability to control one's own body and one's own state, and a process of mutual regulation. where with the other person, one's able to gain a sense of how to interact with that person. And the model that I have is not one of perfect synchrony or perfect attunement, but it's a model in which there are periods of time where there's matching between the two people, and then there's a mismatching between them, and then a reparation, a correction in terms of how they are together, going back to a matching state. So the normal interaction is not this perfect romantic interaction. It's an interaction in which we're together and we're apart and then we're together again. Now I know sometime when my wife and I are here in São Paulo, we're going to go to a samba club. And we will match while we're dancing a tiny little bit of the time. And then we will mismatch a great deal of the time. But hopefully what will allow us to keep dancing together is that we both know that we want to try to coordinate the interactions together. And we want to create or co-create a new meaning together about how we are together. So let me show you first a set of slides about a normal interaction, and then I'll show you the videotape of what's going on. First, when we take pictures of the mothers and babies together, they're actually facing each other. They're looking vis-a-vis one another. But when we record it, like you're seeing in this picture, we turn the pictures to the outside so that we can score and code the behavior, because we microanalytically code what's going on between them. But in this case, they're looking directly at one another. So you see this little boy first greeting the mother. They're mutually greeting each other. And look at where his hands are. Look at his facial expression. And also look at his posture. Look how he's sitting up straight. And he's really ready to engage in the interaction. And then she leans forward and he grabs a hold of her hair. And as you can see in his face now, this is one of the best things that's ever happened in his life. But it's not necessarily the best thing for the mother, and after a while, she tries to disengage. But this little boy weighs almost 11 kilos. So when he's holding on, he holds on really well, and he's having too good a time to want to let go. So what happens and in this situation is when she finally disengages from him, she makes this facial expression, which is an angry or threatening facial expression. It lasts less than half a second. Right? That's how fast it is. In that moment, when she's making that facial expression, now look at his facial expression, where his hands are, and then in the next moment, look at what he does. And you might even want to do it for yourself, because you can say, what is the meaning that he's made out of her facial expression? He's put his hands in front of his face. He's turned away. He's shrunk down. He's moved back in his chair. So there's a kind of meaning, which we don't really know what his meaning is, but that has to do with threat or danger in this situation. And then when she's picked this up right away, and she starts to play with him, and he does this very cute thing. This is why I study babies. He looks at her from under his hands. But he still hasn't put his hands down. And then about 4 or 5 seconds later, he smiles, but what do you notice about his smiling at this point? He's still not looking at her. And it takes him another 20 seconds